We have arrived at the end of the Cold War life cycle. However, this is not a goodbye Cold War type of video because the game isn't going anywhere and I will continue to play it. However, this is most likely the final version of the game, so now is the most appropriate time to discuss my thoughts on the game. To start, I think it's worth mentioning how different this game is from the others. Unlike previous games where the characters were often on their own to achieve their goals, in this game you have a full team to guide you through it, making you feel less alone and more safe. There are also new elements to zombies such as the minimap, health bars, and objective markers that help players find their way, which does reduce the horror aspect of the game. I used to have more of an issue with this, but I have come to realize that Cold War is simply a different experience from the previous games. And although I might prefer a more horror-based atmosphere, I don't want to criticize Cold War for not having it because it clearly wasn't the intended tone. As part of the new action-based tone, Cold War places a much greater emphasis on story quests than in previous games. Before, they were more of an optional side objective, even in Black Ops 4 where it was more of a 50-50 balance. But in Cold War, it feels like completing the quests are the intended way to play. This is partially due to the reasons I listed before, such as the radios, the objective markers, but it is also due to various changes that they've made to the game that reduce the difficulty of surviving. Things like reducing zombie damage until round 10, having plenty of reserve ammo, and the removal of a perk limit. When playing just to complete the quests, these changes help to make them more accessible than they've ever been before, but they do hurt the overall survival experience by making the game a little too easy. Which is why I believe that simple survival gameplay was just not the priority when they made this game. At least for the round-based maps. To make up for the easy high-round gameplay on the standard maps, there are other modes that offer a greater challenge. The first of which is Onslaught, which is a pure survival experience. There are no quests, there are no exfil, so the objective is simply to survive as long as possible. It does have the same elements from the round-based maps that make those a little too easy, but the pace is much quicker in Onslaught, making it much less noticeable. Onslaught also limits the rate at which you progress by making perks, weapons, and upgrades only drop after every boss round. Because of this, you are forced to make decisions about what you will keep and what you will leave behind, as whatever you choose will be all that you have until the next boss round. As long as you manage everything well, you will still be able to progress at the same rate that the difficulty increases, but eventually you will have to rely exclusively on your skill as a player to keep going, because once overwhelmed, there's very little chance of recovering. Outbreak is the other major mode in Cold War Zombies, and it differs from the other two by offering a more open-world exploration style of gameplay. Although you have more control over your progression than in Onslaught, if you don't explore and find better loot hidden in the world, you will be overwhelmed by the jumps in difficulty much sooner. And although you will spend more time in each round than in round-based or Onslaught, the difficulty between rounds is much greater, so you will have to choose carefully what you bring into the next world. Outbreak also has two quests, one of which has a difficulty more in line with the other round-based map quests, but the other is much more difficult. The lead up to this quest is not too bad, but the ending in the missile silo as well as the Legion boss fight offer a much greater challenge. Because of how challenging the ending of the first Outbreak quest is, I would consider it to be the best of the game. I do like how a majority of the quest is pretty simple, but then having the boss fight be much more challenging. This makes it so that losing isn't too frustrating because it's not that hard to get back to it, but completing it was very satisfying. For me, completing most of the quests in this game left me with a that's it feeling, especially in Forsaken with just how easy and fast that boss fight was. And this game certainly would have benefited greatly from a difficulty system like Black Ops 4 had, but I think it would have been much cooler if each map had two quests. A Requiem and Omega version. The Requiem ones could have been the same as they currently are, but then the Omega ones could have been much more difficult. If they had done that, they would have satisfied the people that wanted to see the main story, like myself, and the hardcore players would have been given a greater challenge to complete, as well as being rewarded with extra story information by completing these challenges. It also would have been a cool way to incorporate the operators from both factions, and perhaps you could have chosen a faction before the game and that would have determined which version of the map you played, but instead all the operators are simply on Requiem. However, even though I would prefer a little more difficulty in this game, I can forgive it because I really enjoy the story that it does tell.
It's our lucky day, Strike Team. We have new orders from the director.
It feels like a complete story, and despite ending on a cliffhanger, almost everything that was introduced got some sort of resolution. For example, in Die Maschine, players are left to wonder who the announcer is because it's never just been a generic voice, but rather a character in the story.
Max.
It's never explicitly mentioned, but over time the mystery of this voice is slowly unraveled until it is revealed to be the Forsaken, the discovery of which leads right into the last map with the objective to kill it. And then there's Zykov, who at first is an unnamed character from the Die Maschine intro, who is not directly mentioned by anyone in the cutscene, but he does stand out due to how chilling his situation is to watch. But when it is revealed that he did in fact survive, not only is it a cool reference to the beginning, but it also makes it feel like the story goes back farther in time than where the game starts. And in general in this game, most of the characters and enemy types that are introduced in one map do tend to stick around in the future maps, which makes the whole thing feel connected. I also just like the characters and how different they all are from one another. Weaver wants to stop the outbreak, but wants to do so by the book. Peck and Ravenov are both defectors, but one did it out of selfishness and the other did it out of morality. And then there's Samantha, who in my opinion is the best character of the game.
This is the only way.
By watching how she acts in this story, it's very clear how her childhood has affected her. Element 115 put her through a lot, and keeping it locked away in the Dark Ether is clearly very important to her, but she has seen the ways that organizations can be corrupted. She's even been responsible for it herself a few times. This is likely the reason that she chooses to work alone, to go behind Weaver's back, to put the inversion warheads in the ocean, and ultimately sacrifice herself. Overall, my only issue with the story is not with the story itself, but rather the way it is told. If you were to only play through the main quests, you'd still get a good grasp of what's going on, but you'd be missing a lot of important information from the intel. They seem to rely too much on the intel to bridge the gaps between maps, and without knowing what happens in the intel, a lot of important plot points seem to just come out of nowhere. Like Maxis going missing, or Valentina being evil, or even just Zykov himself. They don't get any mention outside of the intel until the map in which they're relevant. And it's sad because the way to fix this would simply have been to put cutscenes before each map that explained all the important things leading up to it. Like I said, overall the story makes sense and everything is connected very nicely, but you do have to do some homework to see it all properly. But the intel isn't all bad though. A lot of it is still used to expand on the story in ways that the main quests simply couldn't. A lot like how the radios were used in the previous games, and being able to listen to them outside of the game is a very cool feature. But anyway, those are all the major points I wanted to get to about this game. But just to reiterate, Cold War Zombies takes a very different approach, focusing more on story than survival. Because of this, high-round survival-style gameplay on round-based maps can be a little easy, but the other modes make up for it, and I am okay with that because of how much I enjoyed the story the game tells. And now with that out of the way, I'd like to share some smaller opinions I have on the game, both things I like and dislike. Firstly, it is an absolute crime that Kevin did not get to write more songs in this game. They're all so good, and he was off to such a strong start with Alone, and his music does add extra layers to the story, and I can't understand why he didn't get to do more. I wish there were more rewards for completing the quests. I think it would have been cool if you got a new operator after every one, like Samantha after Firebase Z or Valentina after Mauer, but all you really get is a challenge. There aren't even achievements, which kinda sucks. And it also sucks that there's no post-launch achievements. I really like doing those. The HUD's okay. It's pretty similar to the multiplayer one, which is kinda lame. The individual elements are clean, but sometimes they put just so much on the screen at once that it still feels cluttered, even with all the options turned off. I appreciate the music player. I like getting to hear the songs more than once, especially in longer games. The menus feel kind of sloppy to me. I don't really like how all the different modes and maps are all thrown in together. I feel like it could have been organized better, but this isn't really an issue with zombies and more an issue with the game. I wish I could disable some of the skill tree upgrades. It is kind of a cool thing to have, but I feel like skill trees like this work better in games where you can start over from the beginning, like in Borderlands. But in this game, they are permanent, and sometimes I just don't want to start with a Bowie knife. I don't really like how reliant Treyarch was with health bars in this game. In the past, they've always been able to tell players how much health an enemy has in more creative ways, like the heads left on a Margwa or George's Light, but I wouldn't mind it as much if we could completely turn off the health bars and icons like in Outbreak Survival. Similarly, I'm not a huge fan of their reliance on objective markers. They're helpful the first time you play a map, but once you learn your way around, they're kind of just a waste of space on the HUD. It especially sucks because Treyarch have done a good job in the past with directing players through their maps, like with lighting or clever layouts. And to an extent they still do that in this game, but then they slap an objective marker over it. The operators are pretty lame. It would have been so much cooler if they could have interacted with each other and the Requiem team and the environment, but unfortunately they just don't. At least the on-disc ones have this issue. The DLC operators seem to be better, not perfect, but better, but they are locked behind a paywall, which really sucks. Especially because these characters have so much personality in the campaign, I wish it could have carried over into zombies as well.
Scar? You mean this? Is it noticeable?
At first, the attachments in this game appear to be random, but it turns out that they're not truly random. You will always get some kind of optic on your gun, making iron sights incredibly rare. And I could be wrong, but some attachments don't seem to get used at all, like the B-Ops mini clamp on the XM4. And finally, I don't really like that they added the option to use any blueprint or custom mod at any time through the pause menu. It's a very immersion-breaking way of doing it, and I wish it had been done through the armory with salvage, similar to how you could randomize your attachments, but it does make quests a little easier, which is why they probably chose to keep it this way. And yeah, those are my general thoughts of the game from the past year. There's so much more I could say about this game, but I do want to keep it simple. Overall, I like this game, I'm happy with it, and I will certainly continue to play it in the future. Like I said, this isn't a goodbye Cold War video. I may even make more videos on it in the future if I feel like it, but for right now, that is all.